Connor's parenting book recommendations. Book recommendations for baby birth and podcasts and in general. So baby birth, not that guy. I will tell you my friend Emily Stanwyck, find her on the gram. She's fantastic. We'll tag her in this video. Emily Stanwyck is a badass and she will give you all the things when it comes to the actual birth. But when it comes to parenting, I do have some recommendations. So these are my, I don't know, what should we put on the title? Connor's parenting book recommendations. Starting out here, because I think that there's something we need to understand. When it comes to being a parent, you think a lot about the kid. You gotta think about yourself first. Let's start with you. This book is called When the Body Says No. It's by Gabor Mate. You're gonna see a lot of trends here. Gabor Mate is somebody I really look to when it comes to parenting, raising children, the deeper inner workings of how we become who we are, which gives us an understanding. We can understand how we became who we are and what are the benefits, what are the pros and the cons of who we are as people. If we can be honest with ourselves about what that is and how that came to be, that gives us a framework to work from when it comes to raising children, which is a important thing. So it starts with your own work. And that's why I say When the Body Says No is an incredible, incredible book. Let's read a review here from Bruce Lipton. It says, Gabor Mate skillfully blends recent advances in biomedicine with his personal stories of his patients to provide empowering insights on how deeply developmental experiences shape our health, behaviors, attitudes, and relationships. It's a must read. Bruce, I agree with you so much. When the Body Says No by Gabor Mate. Make sure to grab it if if you got kids coming your way, if you have new kids, if you just want to read a great book that will shake you up and have you looking at things in a completely different way. When the Body Says No by Gabor Mate. Moving on. As I said, you need to start with you. A good place to start is the book It Didn't Start With You: How Inherited Family Trauma Shapes Who We Are and How to End the Cycle. Here is one thing that we all need to take responsibility for, in my opinion: ending the cycle of bullshit. Okay? It's really important to look at this. Like, there is family cycles. There is family inherited trauma. It's hard to say that that doesn't exist. If you live in a family that has not passed down some trauma, you're lucky, right? And you're probably naive and you're probably delusional because it's not a thing, right? Somebody was beaten, abused, bad things have happened in your family somewhere. And maybe because there's an abundance of DNA that we don't really understand what it does. They call it junk DNA, which safe and effective, I guess. I don't know. But I have a hard time believing that. I have a hard time believing that there's not experiences encoded in our DNA that are passed to us and that manifest themselves in our lives. And It Didn't Start With You breaks it down. It says a groundbreaking approach to transforming traumatic legacies passed down in families over generations by an acclaimed expert in the field. Depression, anxiety, chronic pain, phobias, obsessive thoughts. The evidence is compelling. The roots of these difficulties may not reside in our immediate life experiences or in chemical imbalances in our brains, but in the lives of our parents, grandparents, and even great-grandparents. The latest scientific research now making headlines supports what many have intuited. The traumatic experiences can be passed down through generations. I just got chills. It's a beautiful book. It Didn't Start With You by Mark Wallen. Mark Wallen. Mark Wallen. It Didn't Start With You. Make sure to snag that one as well. Last up here, and I will say this, guys, you're noticing that I'm bringing up a lot of books by men. I am a man, so I resonate with the writings of men oftentimes more so. Ladies, I will point you to my wife. I will point you to Emily Stanwyck. I will point you to our doula, Sarah. Great resources, amazing people. Check that out. Fellas, I'm speaking to you right now because I am one of you, new dads, soon to be dads. I say this: if you are going to read one author, if you're going to be one author, right? New parents or soon to be parents, or people who want to be parents. If you're going to read one author, that author is Daniel J. Siegel. Okay. I couldn't put one book, so I pulled a bunch of his books up here. The Developing Mind, fantastic. Mind is not for adults. Not for children. It's for adults. Fantastic book as well. Haven't read Interconnected. Aware, fantastic. Brainstorm, have not read it, but I heard great things. Mindsight, fantastic book. Becoming Aware, have not seen it. The Power of Showing Up. It's a parenting book. Haven't read it, but I bet it's really good. The Whole Brain Child, have read it, fantastic. No Trauma Discipline. Like these, the Yes Brain. Like he has got so many books talk about neurological development, parenting, how children develop. It's so important if you're going to be a parent to understand how children develop, because part of the time they are little adults and sometimes they're not, right? And the child's brain is different, right? It's developing in a way that ours doesn't. And to be able to relate to that, it's really important to understand that child's brain. And Dan Siegel is so good at this because he also, in The Whole Brain Child, for example, I recommend not getting this on Audible, get the hardcover. There's workbooks in there. And it gives you guidelines and frameworks for how to discuss neurological development with your children in language they can understand from people who have raised children, right? Because he also wrote this book with Tina Payne Bryson. She contributes in the audiobook as well. That's what I have now, but I'm getting the hardcover so Ro and I can go through it when she's a little bit older. But as a parent, it's so nice to have that framework to be like, hey, let's talk through things. And one thing that really stuck out to me when it came to Dan Siegel, one thing, God, I'm just getting like emotional thinking about this. That just like really, and I know I've talked so much about principles in this episode, but one thing that really stuck out to me reading Dan Siegel's work and The Whole Brain Child is this principle of integration. Integrating with a child, something I never had, right? I never had someone to help me integrate experiences. Right? When things would go bad and I experienced some shit, the kid should never have to experience growing up. I never had someone to integrate that with. Like I didn't have someone says, hey, like, let's talk through that. You know, it was always, well, other kids have it worse, right? Could be worse. You need to don't worry about that. You know what I mean? Well, I tried my best. Deflection, projection. Not helpful, dude. Kids need to be able to integrate experiences. And it may not even be your fault. One of the things he brings up in The Whole Brain Child is this little girl who was in a car accident. That happens, right? Little kids are going to be in car accidents. Everybody was fine. The ambulance came. And he talked through how this little girl, I think she was 2 or 3, how they were able to help her integrate that experience so she didn't carry it with her. Because that's for a little kid, you think about that. Like I remember I was in a car accident when I was a kid. I was probably like 5, maybe a little bit younger even. One of my first early memories. And it was so interesting. I remember the window broke that was next to me. So there was window was next to me, it broke. And for me, the way that I could articulate that was like, it was like the window broke and like little pieces of glass were like little people, like were jumping on me because the glass went all over me. So that's the way I could discuss it, right? Like, and this little girl in the book, she was talking about, she says like the wee woo, like she calls the ambulance like the wee woo or the, you know, it's like the siren. She makes the siren noise. And so they were discussing this experience with her that was very scary for her over and over again to help her integrate that experience. And I think about that versus my experience as a kid, and I never had any of that. So one thing that I will always aim to do with my child is help her integrate good and bad experiences, right? So say she wins something or does something or whatever, or does good, gets good grades. Like, okay, well, how did that happen? Like what, you know, because I don't want to be like, oh, you're just good at this, right? Oh, you're good at that. It's like, no, you don't reward inherent talent, you reward effort, right? Effort when you win, maybe lack of effort when somebody loses, and keep it even, keep it objective. So there's very few times where I'll say like, oh, you're smart. Oh, you're good. It's like, oh no, you worked hard. Oh, you like really tried, especially when victories happen. And of course, kids will know, right? When they're inherently talented, they're going to get a lot of that, especially if they stand out in certain fields. It's important, I think, for parents to stay grounded and rewarding the work, the effort, more than the inherent talent, right? Because then when something happens and life happens and you grow up and nobody gives a shit how good you were at this thing, you have to actually operate from merit. That's what's encoded, right? That's the neurological programming is like, hey, the common denominator here is that we all get a chance to work. We all get an opportunity. And some people's opportunities are more advantageous than others, and that's obviously true. But the common denominator is work. We all got to work, right? We all got to do our best. We all got to put in effort, right? And if they're operating from a place of, oh, effort equals success, I like that versus, oh, I'm good, so I should get success, right? It's the difference in somebody trying to be better versus somebody trying to assuming and kind of narcissistically believing that they deserve more. So it's a subtle nuance there, but these are the kind of things that I get from Dan Siegel's work. And this Whole Brain Child piece, I just thought it was so good. That principle of integration, that was meant so much to me. Like it just resonated. You know, when you read something, it just sticks out to you. Dan Siegel's work does that for me and for parenting and Ro and looking at how to raise a kid. And these are things that it's funny that I've been like into this stuff for a long time. I was really actually got super interested in childhood development in my late 20s. So I will be reading all of these books. I haven't got through them yet. I've gotten through about half of them. But I can personally attest to The Whole Brain Child, Mindsight, and The Developing Mind. I believe I read that a long time ago and really liked it. So there's some really great books here, guys. If you can look up his YouTube videos, he has this little model of the brain where he uses his fist. It talks about the brainstem and operating from like what they would call like the reptilian brain versus the prefrontal cortex and what happens where. And that's something probably the way he explains it, a 5 or 6 year old could probably kind of grasp it. Because they're like, oh, I have a thing in my head that like does stuff. So that's my recommendations, guys. So we've got, what do we have here? Gabor Mate, When the Body Says No. It Didn't Start With You. Two very similar, but also very beautiful books. And I read those back to back. I really liked that. And then Dan Siegel's work, I would just go through this and see what resonates and jumps out with you, and start there. But if you could just do one, if you're like, oh, I'm about to have a kid in a couple weeks and you want to read a couple books on Audible or something, I would go to Dan Siegel first for parenting stuff, and then how to show up for your kids via your own work is going to be When the Body Says No. And It Didn't Start With You, but it didn't. God, there's just, I would think like I wish they were all like required reading for early parents or soon to be parents.